Yo, what's up my disciples? Welcome back to another drawing tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about how to draw the human figure and create dope looking characters like the one you see right here. Alright, so if you remember last time, we were talking about how to draw form and how to use those contour lines, okay? So we need to keep that in the back of the mind as we move on to this next section, which is how to draw the human form. So the first thing that I want to do is actually drop this opacity down so we can draw on top of this model that we have here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull out a red pencil. And, you know, a few disclaimers before we start. You don't need to be doing this digitally to learn this stuff. You know, you can use pen and paper, you can use pencil and paper, it doesn't matter. Use whatever drawing tool of your choice that you want to use. But today, my number one tip is going to be forget about the anatomy, okay? When we're drawing the human form, we are just worried about, you know, the big shapes. We're worried about getting, you know, some of the shapes and the proportions correct. And for me, doing anatomy is like the icing on the cake. That's the last step. So I just want you guys to completely forget about anatomy, you know, forget studying about anatomy for now. First, we need to just develop, okay, how we simplify the human body and how to make the human form. Now, everyone has their own approach to it. This is my approach, and I encourage you guys to go out there and learn other artists' approach to simplifying the body, but that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's just go ahead and get started with it. Okay, so what I do when I am breaking down the human figure, I start breaking this down into simple shapes, and the first thing that I do is I start with the torso. And the reason I start with the torso is because the torso is basically where everything kind of happens. That's like your centerpiece, that's like your core, right? And you know, that's where your balance kind of come from and where your limbs kind of come out from. So I like to start off with the torso. The shapes that I use for the torso are the following shapes that I'm going to draw out. Okay, so at the bottom of this rib cage, okay, that is an important landmark for me. So I draw a line across there. Another important landmark for me is where this clavicle is. Okay, and so from these two lines, I just connect them down the side. Okay, so that is my first shape, and it's a little bit like a tapered square. Okay, the second shape that I like to do for this torso is, again, another box that starts where the hip starts. It starts right there where you see the pelvis, and I draw straight down and I go ahead and connect this. So we have this second looking box, and then what I do is I just connect those two boxes together. Okay, so this is your torso. Alright, and this is how I like to simplify it down. When I'm drawing the pose, you know, I like to just think of this form. It's kind of like an hourglass, you know. An hourglass kind of comes in and comes out just like that, you know. And a lot of people think and say like, oh, that's how you draw the the female figure. Well, that's how I draw both figures, right? I use this hourglass type of shape to represent that. Okay, now for the shoulders, I like to represent that, right? And look at this, I'm just drawing through, and I like to just draw a triangle right there. Okay, so that is your third shape right there. Okay, and for the arms, I put light circles right here to kind of represent you know, the edge of the shoulder, and the arms, you know, a lot of people, okay, so this is something that's kind of tripped me up when I was learning to draw. It's like they would tell you to draw like an actual like cylinder, right? They tell you to draw this cylinder because they're trying to think about that form. Now that's correct, but for me, I like to just make it even more simple, okay? I'm thinking about that cylinder in the back of my head, but instead of having a perfect cylinder, you don't need that, right? What I typically do is just something like that, you know, and most of the time I don't even draw this joint, but I draw the joints as little light circles, and the forearm as well as the legs, I just draw in as a bowling pin. Okay, so you see that shape? It's just a bowling pin, right? And the reason I don't really make these joints that pronounced, because they're just connecting two areas, and once you realize that, then you start thinking about it just a little bit different, in my opinion. Okay, so we're just coming through, adding shapes in. For the neck, I think of that as a cylinder, but the bottom of the neck touches that line of the clavicle, and it just kind of comes right up into the head, and it connects to the jaw right there. So we're gonna do that. Okay, so let me go ahead and just quickly dash in this other side of the arm. Same thing. Just thinking about the shape. Don't look at the anatomy. It doesn't matter what the anatomy is doing. Use that bowling pin shape for the forearm. Use those two parallel lines, you know, earlier on. We'll get into the anatomy of the hand, but honestly, when I'm just drawing out a pose, I just draw it as like a little circle or a mass, you know. I don't put much detail in it, and if the hand is like crunched up, then I'll do a smaller circle, you know, whatever the case may be. But I typically, sorry about that, I typically do, you know, like the hand last, and I just get the gesture down right now. So again, when you're just learning drawing, I really want you to forget about the like drawing muscles in. Okay, we're technically learning anatomy, but we're learning just the basics of it. We're just learning the bare bones. Okay, so from here you kind of get this taper coming in, and I typically like to draw this line as well, and that's just changing up that square a little bit. For the legs, again, we just want to use those parallel lines for the top, right? Round that down. And then for the bottom section, we're using that bowling pin again. Just like we saw with the forearms, we just simplify this down into a bowling pin kind of shape. Okay. Same thing with the other leg. Let's go ahead and dash that in. Bowling pin for the lower leg. And for the feet, instead of using like a square or circle as I did for the hand, I like to just use a kind of like triangular shape. That is my preference. I just kind of create little triangles down here, and for me, that's good enough to represent the feet. Now the head, we didn't draw that in, but for the head, I always just simplify it down into an oval until I'm going in and detailing. And detailing is the last step after we figure out the pose, the gesture, you know, then we can go and add details. And at that point, that's literally the easy work. What we're doing right now, creating the landscape for the figure, this is the hard part. And this is what's going to be different for every single person. So let's go ahead and take out that figure we had at the beginning. So this is the mannequin that I use. Now you can use whatever mannequin you want, okay? Some people like to, you know, use a stick figure, right? It's like maybe they'll come in here and they'll draw these things, right? But they're just drawing it as a stick figure. And some people say, oh, that's the first step. It depends, you know? It really depends. this is the first step. You know, if you're just learning to draw, you know, just draw a stick figure. You know, same thing here, but instead of having 2 lines to represent some form, you're just showing the important landmarks. And this can be helpful as well. You can use this to start to build up your character. You know, maybe you're working out a pose and you want to start it off with just a stick figure. My shorthand is what you see to the right. I use this one right here. And what I like about this, it's very simple, right? It's not a lot of shapes to deal with, but it gives you very important landmarks. Like the bottom of this rib cage is important. The start of this pelvis is important. You know, this line right here is really important. Your clavicle, because you know that's how you're tilting and angling. So this line is important. So again, this line is important. This line is important. This line is important. This line right here is important. This is important, obviously. Those are like proportions and stuff, but those are the important things that I'm looking at. So what I want you guys to do for this video is pull up a figure that looks like this, okay? And I want you to come through and I want you to develop your own shapes that you want to use to make your mannequin, right? Maybe instead of that square, you want to use a shape that looks like this, right? You want to represent it like this, and you want to represent the rib cage like this. I've seen people use that, and you want to represent this as a circle as well, right? And you want to represent these as ovals, okay? There's no wrong way to figure out how you want to represent the body. All I want you to do is these key landmarks right here, you know, bottom of the rib cage, because this is going to be for twisting your clavicle, right? Coming out here to your arms, joint, joint, and joint, joint, and joint, joint, joint here, joint, joint, you know, all these joints. I just want you guys to have some way to represent joints, some way to represent the lines of action. So come in here. The challenge for, you know, this week is to come in here and create your own mannequin. And if you do this, if you're following along, guys, this only takes maybe 5-10 minutes to experiment with different shapes and see what shapes you like, right? Do one of these, create your mannequin in your style that you think is going to be helpful. I'll put some links in the description for other people's mannequins so you can see how to develop your own, and post this on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, whatever social media you're on, and use the hashtag Messiah's Mannequin Challenge. And I'm gonna go through and I'll select one of your guys' submission, and I'm gonna give you a shout out on whatever social media that you're using so people can go follow you. And from here on out, we're going to be using the mannequin that you develop to draw anatomy and the human figure. So thanks guys for checking this video out, and until next time, peace and love, and see you around.